It is time we dug a little bit deeper into the lingering questions we have about From, the nature of the mystical town, time, the talismans, and the monsters. Most importantly, how do the leading theories tie together with the mythology we have explored so far? In this video, we'll attempt to answer all of these questions in the first part of a full analysis of the series. Please keep in mind that this video may contain spoilers of the first 8 episodes of the show. We'll also be discussing the preview of episode number 9 at the end of the analysis. For your convenience, the video timeline has been sectioned into chapters, but I highly recommend watching them in order to better understand the context that will be laid out. The Shadow. Let's start with the leading question. What are these creatures? And why do they seem to know so much about the people of the town? Since the beginning of the show, a familiar concept had been itching in the back of my head, but only now, with the most recent episodes, this concept appears to make more and more sense. This analysis will inevitably bring us to the famous and iconic Swiss psychiatrist and psychoanalyst Carl Jung, and those familiar with his fascinating work regarding the nature of the psyche may already have an idea of where we're going. For context, here's a refresh of key information about the show. At this time, the evidence suggests that the people of the town are not dead. There are cannibalistic monsters that only emerge out of the forest during nighttime. The monsters seem to have intimate knowledge of the people of the town. The monsters look human on first impression, and their dated clothing initially suggests that they are or were previous residents of the town. Every resident of the town seems to be struggling with a troubled past, inner demons, and chaos. This is arguably the key commonality connecting them. A talisman, which symbols appear to be connected with Norse mythology, is the only thing keeping the monsters at bay during nighttime. But why? Finally, a kid dressed in white seems to appear as a potential counterpart to the monsters, but can only be seen by Victor and Ethan. The show has so far made an effort to illustrate the contrast between light and darkness, day and night, chaos and faith, and the monster within. This brings us to the concept of the shadow self. Carl Jung believed that each and every one of us has a separate identity that comprises all of the unknown instincts, dark impulses, and desires that we actively suppress as we deem them immoral or wrong when we grow up. He called this other self or identity that's ultimately part of who we are, the shadow self. The shadow represents everything we don't want to know about ourselves, the part of us that terrifies us, the most shameful thoughts and inclinations we fear having exposed to the outside world, our inner chaos. Interestingly, Jung also described the shadow self as cannibalistic and believed that ravens, crows, and spiders were symbols of the shadow.
Somebody screamed because the spider came down from the ceiling.
But the shadow itself can manifest in the form of a demon, snake, or some other terror-inducing form. The shadow self lives deep in the unconscious depths of our mind, meaning we have no conscious awareness of it, and we usually see its manifestation as nightmares, anger, violence, and destructive behaviors. When we are dreaming, which we mostly do at night, when we are under the influence of substances like alcohol, and when we experience stress and trauma. Because it is an unremovable part of us, Jung warned us that this shadow self needs to be acknowledged and integrated into our personality by our conscious selves, or the ego. Otherwise, we risk becoming possessed by the shadow, unable to understand and control its dark impulses. We often see this in daily life with people who have little self-knowledge, or people who grew up in highly restrictive environments or religious settings that led them to suppress many dark impulses. These impulses often end up taking over the individual later in life and exploding into the world in destructive ways, especially when the inhibitions of the individual are lowered by drugs, stress, or morally conflicting situations, as we saw in the case of Father Catri's explosive violence towards an abusive dad in episode number 7, and Ellis's outburst at Colony House. According to Jung, the psychological rule says that when an inner situation is not made conscious, it happens outside as fate. That is to say, when the individual remains undivided and does not become conscious of their inner opposite, the world must necessarily act out that conflict. This means that we will be attracted like magnets to situations that will force us to confront our shadows, our inner demons, We call these situations fate because we are unable to understand how we seem to end up in the same predicament or troubles over and over, and it can almost feel as if a higher power is placing us within the same box, regardless of which path we take. However, what we fail to see is that it is a part of us, of our unconscious, that is pulling us into these situations, demanding to be acknowledged.
If you don't learn from your mistakes, you're doomed to repeat them, right?
I believe this is what the town represents, and this is why the people of the town have been attracted like magnets to the town, despite having been traveling through different roads across the country. We could say that their unconscious minds pulled them into the town, as a sort of last resort to get them to confront themselves, or rather, discover themselves. The fact that people see a tree before entering the town also adds to this interpretation, since Jung also viewed trees as a symbol for the entirety of the self, with the tree acting as a bridge towards wisdom and self-knowledge. We will shortly explain how the mythology ties into this as well. The forest of the unconscious. The darkness of the forest is often viewed as a metaphor for the depths of the unconscious part of our minds, the unknown, that which is terrifying. Jung further argued that all of the mythologies and fairy tales throughout all of humanity have emanated as representations of universal mental structures or universal ideas that have always existed in a collective unconscious that is shared by all humans. Jung referred to these primordial contents of the collective human unconscious as archetypes, and argued that these archetypes influence human behavior. The latter is meant to be evidenced by the similarities between the myths and fairy tales of all cultures across time. We are all born with the contents of this collective unconscious, which is hard-coded into our DNA as humans like a message in a bottle from our evolutionary past. With the latter in mind, I think it is possible that the creators of the show meant to use the surrounding forest as a literal and creative depiction of the idea of the collective unconscious. And this depiction then beautifully illustrates how the contents of this collective unconscious, the monsters or shadows, emerge out of it when darkness falls upon the town. This unique conceptualization of Jung's theory of the collective unconscious may then explain why the monsters seem to know so much about the people of the town.
How do you know my name?
We know all your names.
Including their names, because they are part of a shared unconscious mind. I will even go as far as predicting that there are likely shadow or monster counterparts of everyone who's residing in the town deep within the forest, but maybe they haven't been shown yet or we haven't looked close enough. This may also explain why the monsters don't bother chasing people, because ultimately you can't run from a shadow. This also gives a new meaning to Sarah's relationship with the voices that she hears, which have basically promised her that by murdering people, everyone, including the voices, will get to go home. We have also seen how Sarah's possession by the voices seems to be progressively growing in intensity. What may explain this is that the shadows may be tricking Sarah into giving them control, to free them from the unconscious, which in this case is represented by the forest. The killing ritual is thus an ideal process to allow this stark opposite of the self to emerge from the unconscious. Maybe the challenge being faced by the characters of the show is thinking that the shadows or these monsters are an external threat, instead of an internal one, or thinking that they can escape from them. You may be thinking, how does the Norse mythology tie into everything? And what about the talismans? This prompts us to the chicken and the egg question. As we've covered, all world mythologies and fairy tales ultimately and fundamentally emanate from the collective unconscious of humanity. Considering that the creators of the show seem to be illustrating human nature at the center of a terrifyingly fascinating mystical town, it would make sense for them to creatively mesh together both the psychological and mythological aspects of these concepts. Otherwise, the mythology will be meaningless to complement the personal story that is being told about the characters. In other words, the mythology-based theory of alternate realms we have been exploring is still likely the backbone of what is more superficially going on in the show. Why the talismans work? We have previously explored how the talismans appear to have etched runes on them that are associated with protection. Some of these runes appear to be associated with the god Freyr, who's the Norse god of sunshine, the goddess Freya, protector of the dead and goddess of love, and we have also seen the Thurisaz rune, symbolizing the forces of chaos. We should note that the forces of chaos in Norse mythology are also interpreted as the forces of the unconscious. So if the monsters are demons or shadows of the town's collective unconscious, it makes sense that the talismans can serve as protection against them, the forces of darkness and unconsciousness, within the mythological context. Another interesting nugget we should highlight is that the end of the world in Norse mythology, Ragnarok, is also interpreted as the battle between the forces of consciousness and unconsciousness or chaos, led by Loki, who is also another Jungian archetype known as the trickster, which can psychologically manifest as self-sabotage, the hero's quest. As a mythological and archetypal symbol, the talisman also represents the magic item of a hero's quest or journey that helps to restore order to a kingdom, with Boyd being the hero of the story in this case.
You created order from chaos. You made it possible for people here to live again.
In the words of Carl Jung, the talisman is the thing or symbol that drives away the evil, and we can only make sense of the unconscious through symbols, fantasies, and dreams. We can also see how Boyd is being guided by hints of his own unconscious mind, since deep down, everyone has a sense or instinct of what they should do.
I have this crazy idea that might actually work, and if it does, then I might be able to find a way to get these people home.
Boyd is arguably closer than most people in the show to what Jung called individuation, which is the ultimate goal of the individual and the people of the town. One becomes individuated or a psychological individual when one becomes one with the whole, embracing the contents of our unconscious mind, including the shadow, into one single entity. This state of wholeness, where one recognizes all the parts that comprise us, is also referred to as self-realization. Additionally, if the monsters are ultimately physical manifestations of the inner shadows of everyone who has resided in the town, this could explain how the monsters seem to be becoming progressively human-like in episodes 7 and 8 of the show, as this process of individuation or self-realization may be happening at some larger collective scale for the town, as if everything and everyone in the town is acting as components of someone's mind, or a supermind. Referencing the theory of universal archetypes we have explained, the phenomena that the people of the town are experiencing are fundamentally the same, but people are making sense of it all based on their experience. As childlike characters, Victor and Ethan are making sense of everything as some sort of magical quest or adventure, whereas Jim and Jade, who are men of science, are approaching the town as a scientific paradox. Ultimately, all of the perspectives or theories are valid as far as they lead the characters to the final goal of self-discovery or self-realization, but in their own context. This even applies to us, the audience, since we are all trying to make sense of the show based on our experiences and backgrounds, but everything that is happening to the characters of the show fundamentally boils down to the Jungian concepts we've covered.
I have this crazy idea that might actually work.
It is therefore Boyd's instinct that he must go deep into the forest of the collective unconscious of the town, initiating a new phase of the hero's journey. I believe it is through this symbolic journey of collective self-discovery into the unknown that Boyd will better understand the nature of the town and the monsters, and in so doing will help bring the people of the town closer to escaping or awakening from this dreamlike realm they're trapped in. This journey into the woods can also be seen as a beautiful parallel to how the people of the town must also venture into the individual forest of their own unconscious minds. Also, in this process, it is possible that the monsters of the forest may be in some way absorbed or reintegrated into the individuals they once were a part of, in a way saving them or restoring them. The process of bringing one's shadow self into the light to integrate the unconscious with the conscious is also referred to as shadow work, which is a term we'll use to refer to what could be the ultimate objective of the people of the town, slaying the dragon. Regarding the snake symbology in the show, Jung also thought of the snake as a primal symbol of the unconscious mind and the process of individuation or self-realization. If we pay closer attention to Ellis's painting, we can see that the serpent more closely resembles a dragon due to its arms. Jung considered dragons to be a symbol of the mother female part of the unconscious mind, which is meant to be the archenemy of the hero who also embodies the symbol of the father figure that conquers the unconscious. We can now see even stronger parallels between the story being told in the show and the underlying symbology. We have said that the shadow can take many terror-inducing forms, and one of the symbols or shapes that the shadow can take is that of a snake. We have also highlighted in our previous videos how the monsters seem to have the ability to hypnotize and seduce people, as well as the similarities of this behavior with the mythological snake, which are symbols of seduction. One of the attributes that has been historically and mythically attributed to snakes is their ability to hypnotize their prey, as we can see in this clip from Disney's The Jungle Book. Even though this is not scientifically accurate, it is possible that the monstrous aspect of these beings or shadows is meant to closely resemble the snake, with the mythological attributes that are usually attributed to them. However, besides these creatures being shadows of those who resided in the town, their monstrous aspect is ultimately a construction of the unconscious to symbolize their dark and cannibalistic nature. These shadows or monsters force us to rethink our perspective of good and evil, as the darkness within is a necessary complement of the light of consciousness. Also, if we think about it, these shadows can't harm anybody unless invited in, or due to human error or self-sabotage, so long as the talismans are placed on the walls during nighttime. An interesting additional bit of information regarding the imagery of the serpent as it relates to the monsters is how Jung highlighted the way the old Latin translation for witch was serpent, connecting to the primitive idea that the spirits of the dead are snakes. The Dreamlike. What about time? Those who are a fan of the theory that the people of the town are trapped within a dream dimension will surely like this part of the analysis. Based on the clues and symbological content that we've covered throughout our different videos, it seems that the creators may not necessarily be going for a simple plot, but a creatively brilliant combination of concepts that give more sense and even gravity to the story of the characters. This may also be one of the reasons why they seem to be confident that guessing what is going on in the show will not be an easy task for the audience. Given the parallels between the Jungian concepts we've covered and the symbology of the show, it appears that the realm or dimension the characters are trapped in is modeled after the structure of a human psyche or mind. The latter would explain the temporal anomalies we've seen in the show and a lot more. However, I suspect that the answer will ultimately not be as simple as saying that they're trapped in someone's mind, but rather that they are in some sort of collective mental construct, which may still be in line with the mythology we've explored. Jung described the human mind as existing beyond space and time. In his own words,
because, you know, there are these peculiar faculties of the psyche that it isn't entirely confined to space and time. You can have dreams or visions of the future. You can see round corners.
It is also possible that every single thing in the town is some sort of mental construction, which could explain why things lack the necessary details at the granular level, or why there is a motel pool but no motel. If the town is a product of someone's mind, then arguably that mind is therefore the energy source for all of the lights, the source of the food, and dare I say, even Victor's peaches. The latter also gives a new light to my observation of episode number 6, where I thought that Boyd's muscle twitches paralleled the flickering of the lights across the town. The show has been implying for a while that something is slipping, changing, or degrading in the town, similar to Boyd's neurodegeneration and Parkinsonian symptoms. The light flickering and the rules of the talisman seemingly becoming more flexible may be foreshadowing that whatever is powering this place is suffering from some sort of degeneration. We also know that the forest seems to be moving closer to the town, which can be viewed as the wolves literally closing in on the people of the town, like the end of a video game, ultimately leaving them no choice but to face the terrifying forest of the unconscious or be consumed by it. Now, for those who don't like the idea of the town being some sort of illusion, this may be a good opportunity to reconsider what is objective reality to begin with, noting that from a neuroscientific perspective, what we call reality is a very limited sensorial construction or simulation that takes place within our brains, which happen to be similarly configured to allow us to perceive the universe in a consistent manner. The latter is one of the reasons why the theory that the universe is a simulation has gained so much popularity among both academia and popular culture. We should mention that in Hinduism, the universe is believed to be the dream of a god. Buddhists also believe that the universe is an illusion. The point that we must realize is that considering how scientists today contemplate the possibility that our very own universe may be an illusion of sorts, this realization does not make the universe or the stakes of our existence any less real, any less serious, or any less relevant. We still don't want the monsters to eat us, and we still have to pay rent. The same principles would apply in the show. The inner child. In previous videos, we've discussed how it seems like the ghost kid together with Ethan and Victor are a contrast to the monsters and Sarah's voices. We also know that there are only children's books in the town, and Victor's childlike drawings are central to the imagery of the show. Throughout history, the symbol of the child has represented purity and innocence. In the Bible, Jesus famously said that unless we become like little children and humbled like them, we will never enter the kingdom of heaven. According to Carl Jung, one of the universal archetypes that guide humans is that of the inner child, or the divine child, which we can see represented across different religions and cultures. The divine child acts as a guide and manifests itself during the most difficult situations or crises to facilitate the process of individuation of the mind, where one becomes whole or a single entity with the shadow and the contents of our unconscious. In Jung's Red Book, he says the following: "You open the gates of the soul to let the dark flood of chaos flow into your order and meaning. If you marry the order to the chaos, you produce the divine child, the supreme meaning beyond meaning and meaninglessness. What this means is that the divine child is a neutral force, a unifying force." In line with everything we've discussed so far, I suspect that the Ghost Kid is a representation of the divine child archetype, serving as a guide for the people of the town, and acting through Ethan and Victor, who are both childlike in their character. In the previous analysis of episode number 8, I also suggested how this Ghost Kid or Divine Child may have ultimately guided Boyd in the direction of the talismans. Both Victor and the Ghost Kid may also be representations of what Jung referred to as the Eternal Child or God-Child archetype, with Victor being an embodiment of the Peter Pan syndrome, or the adult who does not grow up psychologically and emotionally, eternally living in a world of fantasy or fiction. Noting all of these observations, it's almost as if the entire show is an allegory for the process of self-realization and maturation of the human mind, particularly a mind that is not integrated but is fragmented, shattered, and struggling to become whole. This may echo Sarah's comments about how the voices she hears are like shards of broken glass that are struggling to be whole. The big question is how the events of the show will further portray this process of collective self-realization through the fictional tale that is being told. For starters, I believe that the monsters seemingly becoming more human-like is a key indicator of this process, and it may just be that at the end of the series, all of these different beings will coalesce into some sort of a single entity, and the survivors of the town will be allowed to move on and escape this realm or dimension. Preview for episode number 9. The available preview for episode number 9 states that Boyd and Sarah will journey deeper into the forest than Boyd has ever gone, encountering new and terrifying mysteries. Jim's confidence in the radio tower will begin to wane. An unexpected tragedy will cause Donna to unravel, while Kenny and Christy share a moment. Based on everything that we've covered in this video about the forest of the unconscious, it may not be surprising if some of the discoveries Boyd and Sarah will make within the forest will somehow appear familiar to them, assuming that the forest also contains unconscious elements of everyone's minds. Despite the synopsis of episode number 9, we also know that according to the show's public cast credits, the Ghost Kid or Divine Child, as we call it now, will make another appearance in the last episode of the season, along with Victor. And like we've explained in this video, the Kid in White will likely be one of the main forces that will not only help the people of the town move on, but may also play a role in healing or bringing wholeness to the town and the monsters. With this new Jungian interpretation of the show, what are your thoughts and theories about it? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comment section. We will continue making more in-depth explorations of the symbology and meaning of From before episode number 9 airs next Sunday. If you would like to stay tuned with further analysis and interpretations of the show's episodes, please make sure to press the like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell.